Last month, I continued my annual 95-county tour with a swing through East Tennessee. Over the past few years, this area has experienced both economic growth and a population boom. So the people who live there have seen firsthand what can happen when Tennesseans are allowed to build and nurture a community free from the heavy hand of government. But they also know how fragile that stability can be, and they are just baffled by Joe Biden's determination to ruin what they and millions of other Americans have worked so incredibly hard to build. In just over 2 years, Joe Biden and the Democrats have sabotaged our national defense, our border security and public safety in the name of dangerous woke agenda items that prioritize mandates and intellectual conformity over the safety and security of the American people. Tennesseans are worried about the rise of the new axis of evil. Joe Biden is allowing Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea to cross one line after another, and that's not going over very well. Neither is the Biden administration's neglect of a security risk that hits much closer to home. So far this year, Border Patrol and other law enforcement officials have reported almost 500,000 encounters with migrants trying to illegally cross our border over the course of this fiscal year. Now, Madam President, the numbers I'm going to give you are for this fiscal year. They have recorded 332 encounters with people that are on the terrorist watch list. That is right. 332 have been apprehended at the border. These are people that are terrorists. They are on the watch list. Means if you catch them, they cannot come into this country. They have apprehended 330 dangerous gang members. That's MS-13. That is other of these gangs that are trying to get into the country, and they have seized almost 19,000 pounds of drugs. Now, this is what we know, and we can only estimate how many other terrorists or gang members or criminals escaped into the country and how much deadly contraband did they bring with them, because they are all in the category of gotaways. They're the people that you see on surveillance, but you cannot get to them. They're gotaways. Or they're people that after the fact, you don't see them, but after the fact, you find things that they have left along their path as they have escaped into this country. So think about those numbers and who might be coming in. Now, when you look at it, this is a total neglect of our most basic line of defense. And it might be easier to comprehend were it not for this administration's betrayal of local law enforcement. The president has denied that he supports the anti-police movement. But I would remind the president and my Democratic colleagues that acting on anti-police sentiment behind the scenes is still anti-police. Making the job of law enforcement harder to do every day is anti-police. Using the bureaucracy to undermine access to grant funding and life-saving resources, that is anti-police. And deliberately leaving our border wide open to the drug mules bringing fentanyl into our backyards, that is anti-police. Allowing the cartels and the human traffickers to run rampant, turning human trafficking from a $500 million a year business, which it was in 2018, to a $13 billion a year business. That is anti-police. The damage that this administration has done in just under 2.5 years will take a lot longer than that to repair. But simply answering one sweeping policy change with another won't magically reverse the ripple effects of this complete breakdown in orderly governance. Yes, we have to reverse policy, but we must also pay attention to the problems that have left local leaders, law enforcement officials, and families begging for help. So, Madam President, let's kind of work through these issues because they're of concern to Tennesseans. Tennesseans feel like this administration is seeking to normalize lawlessness. They feel they're seeking to normalize lawlessness because of that open border, because of the sentiments and the actions that are anti-law enforcement. They're seeking to normalize lawlessness. Now, at the border, the immediate solution, of course, is to eliminate incentives to illegal immigration, to fund the Border Patrol and invest heavily in both a physical barrier and enhanced technology. Now, these are two things that the Border Patrol has been asking for about 3 decades. Give us a barrier of some type, and where you can't have a barrier, give us better technology. Now, we also need to address the plagues of drug smuggling and human trafficking. The Biden administration's refusal to stand up to the cartels has turned every town into a border town and every state into a border state. Between August of 2021 and August of 2022, the United States lost more than 107,000 people to drug overdoses. Now, 66% of these deaths were due to fentanyl. 107,000 people lost their lives to drugs. They're coming primarily over that southern border. Talk to any law enforcement officer. They will tell you the majority of the drugs they apprehend, they're coming across that southern border. The majority of those drugs are fentanyl. Now, I want you to think about this. We all know about World War I, the lives that were lost, precious lives, World War II, the lives that were lost, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War. Here's some stats for you. In World War I, you had 116,516 U.S. citizens that lost their lives. In World War II, it was 420,200. In Vietnam, 58,220. The Gulf War, 383. So think about this and what we did to protect those lives. And think about what is happening with these drugs coming over that border and this administration not willing to close that border. And in 1 year, 107,000 lives. Think about that. Why will this administration not step up, man up, and work to secure that border? Maintaining the Title 42 order will help us keep what little control we have over the cross-border drug trade. Tens of thousands of migrants are waiting for May 11th to roll around so they can flood the border, and we are watching that footage right now. I would encourage any of my colleagues who are not watching this footage, you need to log on and look at how people are coming up. El Paso, I think they've had 15,000 people over the weekend that have come to that border. The numbers are staggering. We are not ready for this. Last week, my Tennessee colleague, Senator Hagerty, and I reintroduce the Stop Fentanyl Border Crossing Act, which would preserve the continued use of Title 42 authority to remove illegal border crossers and interrupt drug smuggling operations along the border. The Save Girls Act, which is a bipartisan bill I introduced with Senator Klobuchar last month, has a similar goal of thwarting human trafficking operations. Now here's another stat for you. These are not my numbers. These are the administration's numbers. The State Department estimates that between 14,500 and 17,500 people are trafficked into the U.S. every year. Most of these people that are trafficked across that southern border, that's what we're talking about here, that's the universe. And they're looking at between 14,500 and 17,500. Most of them are women. And it's upsetting to realize that 90% of these women and girls become the victims of sexual exploitation. The Save Girls Act would authorize an additional $50 million in grant funding to prevent the trafficking of women and girls and protect children who have been smuggled across this border. Why are we doing this? Because it is our local law enforcement. They're the ones that are on the front lines in this. They're the ones who are conducting rescues and pulling these women and girls away from these traffickers, away from these pimps that are rescuing them and getting them to safety. Madam President, we all know that no bill, no matter how effective, can stop these criminal enterprises entirely, just as no amount of policing or community support can eliminate local crime. Still, our police departments, they are in trouble. Tennessee is no exception. In April of last year, the Knoxville Police Department was 10% understaffed. As of last December, the Nashville Police Department was 193 officers short. Morale is a problem, but so is a lack of funding and resources. So in March, Senator Ossoff and I introduced the bipartisan Filling Public Safety Vacancies Act to provide a one-time emergency boost in funding to help departments hire officers and sheriff's deputies. The bill conditions this funding on the implementation of new vetting procedures not currently required by federal law. I've also introduced a series of bills that would protect schools from becoming key targets for criminals. The Safe Schools Act would establish a $900 million grant program to train and hire safety officers and to increase physical security at our schools. The bipartisan Enhancing K-12 Cybersecurity Act would provide resources and information to schools that will help prevent cyber attacks and establish a better system for tracking cyber attacks nationally. I want to emphasize again that many of these bills are bipartisan. We could pass them this week, and they would each make a difference right away in places like the state of Tennessee. There are things that our citizens want to see done. There is no good reason to delay these bills. They would help to make our community safer. It would be another tool in the toolbox for our local elected officials and citizens who want to see our schools and our community safer, who want our law enforcement agencies to be able to hire and train more police. They would be pro-law enforcement, pro-safety, pro-security principles. This administration's refusal to govern and their neglect of our most basic institutions has left Tennesseans really unsettled. They've worked so hard to build what they have. And they cannot believe that they're looking at an administration that would seek to tear it down. They're frightened of how quickly things have become so out of control. They deserve better than an uncertain future controlled by a president who is asleep at the wheel and a Congress that refuses to put politics aside and work in the best interest of the American people. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.